change their prepaid providers or change their numbers? Is this an issue, and how are you managing to keep track of them and to manage their identity, essentially?
Right. Yeah, it's a tremendous problem. But again, we try not to dwell on the fact that it's a tremendous problem because we're still amazed that we can do any of this stuff at all. Right? I mean, I'm not going to criticize the resolution of their laptop screen if we could miraculously wave a wand and everybody has a laptop. Well, it's not a good enough laptop. It's not a Mac. I had to throw that in there. But no, it is a problem. It's really interesting, actually, how people use cell phones and how it's different from the way people use them here. Again, it's not like it is here, kind of where it's not primarily the way that most people access the internet, for example. But in a country like Kenya, for example, it's very typical that people have 2 cell phones. And the reason is because there are 2 main cell providers. There's 3 providers, but 2 major ones, Safaricom and Celtel. And it costs more to call from a Safaricom phone to a Celtel phone than to call from Safaricom to Safaricom. So everybody gets 2 SIM cards and 2 phones, one for Celtel and one for Safaricom. And they use their Celtel phone to call Celtel and Safaricom to call Safaricom. Again, you could easily predict this. As soon as they put that tariff structure in place, I would have easily predicted people are immediately going to go out and buy 2 phones. But in terms of the address, it's still a problem. But again, as we sort of work through this period, the fact is that before we never had any way of getting back in touch with people. Right? The only way to get back in touch with people was to give them an incentive to get in touch with us. So for example, a government health worker, would make their location be known, because if they didn't, then they wouldn't get paid. Right? I mean, they have to show up at the ministry once in a while to get that check, or actually to get that cash. Right? Because if they didn't, if they would just, the fact that they didn't have an address, if they just decided, it's extremely easy to hide in Kenya. Right? It's extremely easy to not let your whereabouts be known. But again, what's happening right now is that people are creating very compelling applications, very compelling reasons to be known. And people have the apparatus to make that happen with a cell phone. Right? They can be located if they want to be located. But there's, as we've all discovered in the United States with cell phones, there are both advantages and disadvantages to being locatable all the time. So, and they're kind of trying to deal with that as well.
Right here in front.
Sir.
Yeah, you've talked a little bit about rich Java clients that get downloaded on the phone, a little bit about the SMS interface where people can text something and get back some sort of information. Where do you see the derivatives? Is one becoming more important than the other as far as interface goes? Or are there certain things you just can't do via an SMS interface? And you just really need to have them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, talking about the sort of, I mean, you're mentioning Java, but basically what we're talking about is the difference between a rich interface on a cell phone. Think a Palm interface on a cell phone or the iPhone interface versus just the text box that is SMS. And clearly, of course, it's better to have, I mean, if you can have it, if you can have a more rich environment. I mean, we can easily see, and you alluded to it, we talked about it a little bit, you can easily see where you could have a keyhole into all that incredible map data if you can get the broadband and if you can get a graphic interface. The problem is it's very early days, and so there's very little standardization. Even if, we're porting some of our programs to J2ME, Java 2 Mobile Edition, right? That's the version of Java that runs on cell phones. Except the only problem is it doesn't exactly run the same on every cell phone. There's very little, people implement one tiny, J2ME X1 on one, on Nokia phones, and even all the Nokia phones don't implement it the same, which of course makes it very, very difficult. I mean, what do you need to be able to program consistently across platforms? You need to have standards. And it's only now, I mean, there's a tremendous push to get those standards, but again, it's still early days. It's still the wild, wild west in terms of that. I'm really looking forward to the day when we have these standard interfaces, and it's going to be easy to roll out, to reach this incredible expanding population of people. But in the meantime, as I said, in the meantime, I think back to myself, and I remember my history, and I remember the incredible effects of the telegraph. And within my lifetime, I remember the incredible effects of just a personal computer, a DOS computer. And I think, well, okay, I mean, I'm looking forward to all that stuff that's going to happen over the course of the next, say, 10 to 15 years. But in the meantime, as I hope I was able to point out, there are some very compelling applications that, that you can do with just sending a text message and getting a text message back. I mean, what is this big fad that is sweeping across the tech nation now? Twitter. Who knows what Twitter is? Raise your hand if you know what Twitter is. Okay, so very, very well-informed group. I don't think my mom knows what Twitter is, right? But all of my nieces and nephews do. So Twitter, you send little messages, and I probably sound dismissive. I don't really understand it. Maybe I'm getting old. But you basically tell people what you're doing at any one time. Joel is giving a keynote at DLF, and that appears on my Facebook page or something like that, or gets posted to my web page. But what is that? That's text. That's nothing like he was talking about with Second Life and all that kind of stuff. That is like sweeping the nation. It's a huge fad, and it's based on sending tiny little text messages, entirely implementable in SMS. And again, Google just released, Google SMS. So they put all these tools to look up movie times and check the weather and do all these kind of interesting things using SMS. Now, if Google thinks, and I think they're right, that for sometimes, even for folks in the United States who have a real nice laptop with broadband connection and have an iPhone and have all this other stuff, that even for us, sometimes it's very useful to be able to just very quickly. I don't want to go to a website. I just want to type in, my zip code and get back the weather report, or the Minneapolis zip code and find out that it's snowing today, right? If that's useful to us, who have all these other ways of getting information, imagine how useful that stuff is to people in countries where they have none of that. Right. So again, in terms of developing kind of rich client interfaces using Java and even more advanced things like the iPhone SDK, I think that stuff is all going to be great. I mean, we're just dipping our toes into developing for things like the iPhone because we know it's coming. 5 years, 10 years, I don't know how long it's going to take, and our upper end users will be able to use that advanced stuff, now. But there's all of these other people, nearly illiterate mothers of children who need to be vaccinated. And again, if you could just remind them to get the kids vaccinated, again, you're talking about saving thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lives by sending a text message. It truly is miraculous. I mean, again, I watched the previous presentation, and I thought my head was going to explode. I can't believe the world we're living in terms of that kind of visualization of information. I mean, I've always loved maps, and I just found it fascinating. And it's mind-boggling how this will enable us to better understand, or differently understand the kind of data that is available to us. But just as much on the low end, it is truly a revolution where basically, as I said, anybody can communicate anything. I mean, anybody with SMS, if you build a system, can search Google for every piece of text information on Google from rural Botswana. Quite remarkable. You mentioned in your presentation, you're getting web hits from essentially the middle of nowhere, from the Congo, right? So this is something that is really, I think it's really transformative. And I think for folks who work within information sciences, folks who are interested in getting information out to folks, you have to realize that you could, through very simple programming, through very simple interfaces, get huge audiences. I mean, people out there, they want to know stuff, just like people read the newspaper or people go online. They want to know what the sports scores are. They want to know about all the stuff. They want to be able to look things up. Clinicians want to check drugs. Teachers want to know stuff. I was saying beforehand, why can't you, would it really be impossible for us to develop just an SMS-based game that taught kids how to read or taught kids how to spell? Maybe it presents 3 words and asks kids which word is best spelled. And if they pick the right one, then they get a certain reward, right? Or actually, you could do this with results. You could do this with adults and give them a reward in the form of text of cell minutes, which is like now becoming the universal reward system throughout the developing world. Everybody wants more cell minutes. I've got a Ugandan friend who jokes. He said, "Oh yeah," he said, "everybody in Uganda has a cell phone now, but nobody ever has any minutes. They always want you to call them." That's right. They always want you to text them, so they don't have to pay for it. But again, I mean, why couldn't you develop a system like that? That would be, again, a game and something with the correct set of incentives and disincentives to actually drive that kind of knowledge acquisition. The technology is limiting to some extent. It's not a laptop. But I don't think the technology, and I guess this is really the point of my presentation and what we're finding, I don't think the technology is nearly as big a limiter as our preconceptions about the technology.